The most dangerous financial trap in a man's life is not the one that looks reckless. It is the one that looks responsible. That is what makes the years between 35 and 45 so deceptive. By then, most men are no longer doing obviously stupid things. They are not blowing money in ways that make them feel ashamed. They are not living like they are 23, with a paycheck and no memory. They are doing the things respectable adults do. They buy the house, they buy the safer car, they take the promotion, they pay for the school district, they commit to the family vacation, they say yes to the bigger life. And then one morning they stand in the kitchen with coffee brewing, children still asleep, looking at the bank app and doing the same math again. How can a man make more money than ever and still feel like he cannot breathe? That question matters, because if you answer it wrongly, you will spend the most powerful earning decade of your life tightening a cage you still call success. So let me give you the one mother line that everything in this story serves. Between 35 and 45, the great financial danger is not failure. It is building a successful-looking cage. That is the line. Not poverty, not irresponsibility, not bad intentions, a cage. And the reason it is so dangerous is that a cage built out of upgrades does not feel like a cage at first. It feels like maturity. It feels like provision. It feels like you are finally doing what a serious man is supposed to do. That is why almost nobody questions it while it is happening. Men question chaos. They rarely question structure. If the structure looks respectable enough, they assume the stress inside it must simply be adulthood. It is not always adulthood. Very often it is financial rigidity dressed up as virtue. That is the fracture I want you to see. There is a difference between building a life and building a machine that consumes every raise you get. There is a difference between responsibility and permanent overhead. There is a difference between comfort and captivity. There is a difference between being a provider and becoming a hostage to the version of provision you chose too early. If you do not see those differences clearly, this decade will quietly take more from you than any recession ever could. Not only money, time optionality, risk capacity, peace of mind, marriage quality, fatherhood presence, physical health, decision clarity, all of it. That is why I want to name the mechanisms, because unnamed traps are incredibly hard to escape. The first mechanism is lifestyle cement. Most people have heard of lifestyle creep. Very few respect it. They imagine it as harmless softness, a few more dinners out, better seats on the flight, a nicer phone, slightly better furniture. Those things matter, but they are not the main problem. The real problem is not extra spending. The real problem is fixed spending. Once a man gets a larger house, a larger payment, higher taxes, higher insurance, higher maintenance, higher utilities, and a neighborhood whose social expectations quietly rise with the zip code, the money is no longer flowing out in little mistakes. It is locked into the floor of his life. That is lifestyle cement. A temporary income increase gets poured into permanent obligations. And once it hardens, every future month must now carry that extra load whether the man still wants it or not. A mortgage is not just a purchase. It is a monthly command. A finance vehicle is not just convenience. It is a recurring instruction, private tuition, added commitments, structural upgrades, all of them change the amount of money your life must produce before freedom even enters the conversation. That is why this trap is so serious. It does not merely raise your expenses. It raises your break, even identity. You stop being a man who can choose. You become a man who must maintain. That is a very different life. And what makes it worse is that the upgrades usually arrive right when income feels finally respectable. A man crosses into six figures or something close to it. He looks around and thinks, this is the moment I have been working toward. So he upgrades the visible parts of life before he has fully built the invisible parts that make visible success sustainable. That is when the cement sets. Now the second mechanism, I call it comfort debt. A great many financial decisions made in these years are not really about wealth. They are about fatigue. A man is tired. His wife is tired. The children need things. Work is demanding. There are aging parents in the background. The calendar is crowded. The emotional reserves are thinner than they were 10 years earlier. In that state, comfort becomes seductive. Anything that makes life easier now feels reasonable. A nicer car, a shorter commute, a more convenient house, a monthly payment that seems manageable because the spreadsheet says so, a finance solution to the feeling that life is already asking too much. I understand that, but I do not confuse understanding with approval. When you finance comfort, you are usually not buying ease. You are borrowing ease from your future flexibility. That is the trade, and flexibility is one of the most underpriced assets in a man's life. Flexibility lets you leave the wrong job. Flexibility lets you take a temporary step back. Flexibility lets you survive a medical shock without panic. Flexibility lets you refuse a humiliating deal. Flexibility lets you think instead of react. Flexibility lets you become stronger rather than merely busier. Comfort debt does the opposite. It takes tomorrow's choices and sells them to pay for today's relief. The man thinks he bought a better driving experience. In reality, he bought a 6-year reduction in maneuverability. He thinks he bought peace. He often bought a more polished kind of pressure. And the ugliest part is this: the comfort normalizes almost instantly. The payment does not. That is how traps work. The pleasure adapts. The obligation persists. Now let me give you the third mechanism. I call it obligation inflation. This one is more emotionally difficult because it often arrives disguised as generosity, loyalty, or family duty. A man cosigns something because he wants to help. He absorbs debt because he is trying to be a team player. He commits to a higher cost education, a bigger home, a family arrangement, or a financial promise because he wants to be the kind of person people can rely on. I respect that instinct. But respect does not remove arithmetic. Every obligation added to your life raises the amount your life must now generate before you can breathe. That is what men fail to calculate. They count values. They do not count load. You can make a morally admirable decision and still create a financially suffocating structure if you do not measure what that decision does to your baseline. Once obligations accumulate, they do not behave like coffee purchases or subscriptions. They do not vanish because you became newly motivated. They alter the architecture. And architecture is what determines whether a bad quarter feels annoying or catastrophic. A man with a low obligation load can survive adversity with discomfort. A man with a high obligation load experiences the same adversity as threat. That changes the entire tone of life. He becomes less patient, less daring, less present, less generous, less calm, and often less honest with himself, because the machine must keep running. Even when his income is objectively strong, his internal world becomes one of constant maintenance. That is not freedom. That is elegant entrapment. Now we come to the fourth mechanism. I call it income illusion. This is where high earners get fooled. They look at what they make now compared with 10 years ago and feel sure they have progressed. More salary, better title, better benefits, more visible evidence of advancement, and yet they do not feel materially safer. That disconnect is not mysterious. It is the natural result of confusing income with wealth. Income is what arrives. Wealth is what remains. Income can rise dramatically while wealth barely moves if obligations. Overhead and identity, base spending rise right alongside it. Then all you have done is build a larger machine with a more expensive appetite. That is income illusion. It is incredibly common because money coming in hides leaks. A man making good money can fail to notice the waste that would have terrified him in his 20s. There is enough inflow to keep the machine humming, so the inefficiencies go unchallenged. He stops tracking carefully. He assumes progress because the raw number is bigger. Meanwhile, the real question, what stays and compounds, receives less and less attention. This is why men on strong salaries can still feel chronically financially stressed. The stress does not come from low income. It comes from low margin. Margin is the oxygen between what comes in and what must go out. Without margin, even a handsome income can feel brittle. That brittleness is what people experience when they say, "I make good money," but somehow it still does not feel like I am getting ahead. Now let me take you deeper, because these traps become especially dangerous in this particular decade for a reason. I call that the compression window between 35 and 45. Several forces hit at the same time. Your income is often at or near a local high. Your responsibilities intensify. Your children, if you have them, become more expensive. Your parents may begin needing more. Your career may demand more hours and more political tolerance. Your health starts giving you little messages that youth is no longer underwriting stupid. And on top of all that, time starts to feel real. You are no longer imagining someday. Someday has become arithmetic that creates compression. You are busy enough to stop reflecting. You earn enough to hide leaks. You are responsible enough to rationalize obligations. And you are stressed enough to buy comfort when you should be buying margin. That is why this decade is so dangerous. A man in his 20s can be reckless and obvious. A man in this window becomes trapped through respectable decisions he made too quickly to scrutinize. That is harder to spot and much harder to undo once the structure becomes normal. The first long-term cost is delayed compounding. This is one of the cruelest costs because it never sends you a bill. It simply steals the decade when your money could have still grown dramatically if you had given it room to work. A lot of men in this age range think they will start investing seriously once things calm down. Once the house is sorted, once the car is paid off, once the child care burden eases, once the promotion comes through, once the next bonus lands, once life becomes simpler. Life does not become simpler. It becomes whatever structure you built. And every year spent feeding fixed lifestyle obligations instead of building compounding capital quietly widens the gap between the future you could have had and the future you are now likely to have. This matters because from 35 onward, the next 10 years still matter enormously. A man who begins building capital seriously at 35 is not late. A man who keeps postponing until 45 often discovers that the same contribution now produces far less future freedom than it would have earlier. The lost decade is not visible in daily life, but it is brutally visible in the long run. That is why I hate when men treat a savings milestone as permission to upgrade. A base of capital is not an excuse to relax your structure. It is the foundation from which future optionality should accelerate. If you set the foundation on fire to celebrate that you finally poured one, you will spend your life rebuilding instead of ascending. The second cost is chronic pressure. A man with a high break-even point often lives in quiet alarm without admitting it. He may look stable from the outside. Good house, respectable car, professional title, family photos. But inside, he knows there is no room. He feels every unexpected expense as a threat. He feels every work disruption as a danger signal. He feels the monthly machine humming behind every conversation. That pressure changes a man. It shortens his patience. It clouds judgment. It makes him more likely to accept bad work. It makes him less available at home, even when he is physically present. It can make him confuse irritability with masculinity and worry with responsibility. None of that is small. The third cost is success without agency. This is the most painful one, and a lot of men know it privately, even if they would never say it out loud. Their life looks like it worked, but it does not feel like it belongs to them. They have the symbols, but they do not have maneuverability. They can provide, but they cannot pivot. They can maintain, but they cannot choose. That is a miserable kind of success, because you cannot complain without sounding ungrateful. People have it worse. Your life looks decent on paper. But inside, you feel the widening distance between appearance and agency. That distance is soul-draining. How do you get out without burning down the whole house and pretending ascetic misery is wisdom? This is where I want to shift from diagnosis to operating system. The first move is obligation auditing. Not expense tracking in the shallow sense. Not arguing about coffee and streaming services. I mean structural auditing. Write down every recurring obligation you must meet, no matter what. Mortgage, car payments, insurance, school costs, debt service, family commitments, anything that commands cash before you get to vote. Added up, that number is your life's monthly demand. That number tells you more truth than your income ever will. That number is the floor you built. Most men have never actually looked at that number cleanly. They know they feel pressure. They have not measured the engine creating it. Until you measure it, you are negotiating with fog. The second move is identity separation. A great many men are not trapped by arithmetic alone. They are trapped by meaning. They link their identity to the visible markers of a certain kind of adulthood. The house proves something, the car proves something, the neighborhood proves something, the vacations prove something, the school proves something. So any move that reduces cost feels not like strategy, but like personal diminishment. That is poison, because once lifestyle becomes identity, every financial adjustment feels like humiliation instead of liberation. And then the man will choose captivity over the emotional discomfort of looking like he has stepped backward. You must break that link. Your identity is not your payment schedule. Your identity is not your driveway. Your identity is not the brand of proof you display to strangers. Your identity is what remains when the props are removed. The man who can live below his means without feeling smaller is stronger than the man who needs expensive symbols to preserve his self-image, that is, real size. The third move is optionality recovery. You do not have to reverse every decision overnight. In most cases, you should not, but every new decision from this point forward should be judged by one standard. Does this expand my future options or reduce them? That question is better than almost every conventional budgeting question because it forces you to think in terms of freedom rather than immediate affordability. A monthly payment may be technically affordable and still be a terrible trade if it removes room. A simpler choice may feel modest today and be enormously powerful tomorrow because it lowers your break, even point, and returns maneuverability to your life. Over time, those choices compound, not only financially, psychologically. A man with lower fixed overhead thinks differently. He negotiates differently. He parents differently. He works differently. He sleeps differently. He is less desperate, and the moment desperation falls, quality rises across almost every domain of life. This is why I reject the childish idea that spending less automatically means deprivation. Often it means decompression. Now let me address the provider argument directly, because a lot of men hide behind it even when it is hurting their families. They say, I am doing this for my wife. I am doing this for my kids. I am supposed to provide. Fine, but provision is not the same as maximum lifestyle. Provision means security. Provision means emotional steadiness. Provision means giving your family a father and husband who is not owned by every obligation he signed. Children do not remember mortgage size. They remember tension. They remember whether the home felt peaceful or strained. They remember whether their father seemed free enough to be present or permanently preoccupied by the machine. A more expensive life is not always a better provided life. Sometimes it is just a more expensive anxiety system with nicer countertops. That is not cynical. That is accurate. The most powerful gift you can give your family is not an impressive shell. It is a resilient foundation. And a resilient foundation is built on margin, flexibility, and a break, even point low enough that one disruption does not poison the whole household. Now the positive side, when you lower the break, even point, everything changes. I call this margin power. A man with margin does not merely have extra money. He has negotiating strength. He can refuse bad deals. He can tolerate transition. He can take a calculated risk. He can weather a temporary setback. He can think longer. He can be patient. He can walk away. That is power. And it compounds too. A less desperate man tends to make better decisions. Better decisions create better opportunities. Better opportunities create stronger income and more room. More room creates even less desperation. That is the virtuous cycle most people miss because they are busy feeding the vicious one. Now I want to leave you with the real test, because soft endings are useless. You can keep telling yourself that the pressure you feel is simply what adulthood feels like. You can keep treating fixed costs as destiny. You can keep measuring progress by income, title, and visible upgrades while your actual freedom declines. You can keep calling the cage a blessing because the bars are polished, or you can tell yourself the harder truth. You can admit that some of what looks like success in this decade is actually rigidity. You can admit that some of what you called provision was just fear wearing a respectable shirt. You can admit that the machine has grown larger than the life it was supposed to support. You can admit that if you do not reduce the load now, the next decade will harden it further. That is the threshold. Not whether you can become richer on paper, whether you can become freer, in fact. Because if the next 10 years only increase your salary while your obligations rise with it, then you will not become wealthier in the way that matters. You will become a more highly compensated servant to a more expensive structure. That is no victory. The real victory is to reach 50 with room. Room to breathe, room to help, room to pivot, room to say no, room to be present, room to let your money serve your life instead of demanding your life serve your money. That future is still available, but it will not come from another upgrade. It will come from an honest audit, a lower break, even point, a broken link between identity and lifestyle, and a series of decisions that turn your cage back into a foundation. Do that, and this decade stops being the decade that trapped you. It becomes the decade you finally saw the bars clearly enough to step out of them.